Okay, so good morning. Today's daf is daf memchet. Today was the last full daf in the sixth chapter of Sanhedrin, and we are as a reminder of where we're at. We have been discussing the death penalty and the implementation of the death penalty and the various steps that are associated with it. And what we've just touched on now is an interesting debate between Rava and Abaye. The question is, if somebody something that is used, namely shrouds that are used for the deceased, they are usher bahanad. You're not allowed to benefit from them, meaning that you couldn't plunder one person's grave, take their shrouds after the body has fully decomposed, and then go and use them again for somebody else. That is the question, though. So that's the clear halacha. Everybody's in agreement. The question is when does that prohibition start? Does it start from the moment that you've indicated the preparation and the plan to use the shrouds for that? So I have these shrouds and I say, okay, these are going to be used for this particular deceased person. That's what Abaye says. Whereas Rava says, no, it's not until Hazama Lav Milsei, planning and preparation for something is not, in fact, the step that causes us to say that that it's the thing itself. And so that's the debate that we currently have, whether Hazama's milsa or lav milsahi, whether Hazama is considered when you prepare something for something, is that an indication that that item is now used for that particular purpose, and therefore the laws associated with it would apply. So we're going to start again at the two dots, the parentheses notes, siman, kippah, nafshed, techatziva, nechisa, umana. These are, although nechisa isn't actually specifically mentioned, but these are effectively the cases that we'll be talking about. We're going to have 7 efforts. We're going to have 4 efforts to support Abaye. Abaye again says that Hazama milsahi, whereas we're going to have 3 efforts to support Rava. But the final effort for Rava is going to be successful. And in response to that, we're going to say that this is actually a machlokes tanayim. And then we'll conclude by noting that the halacha is like Rava. As you may remember, there are only 6 cases in the Gemara where we say that the halacha, when Abaye and Rava argued that the halacha is like Abaye, they are known by their abbreviation of Yal Kagam. This is not one of them. And so as a result, the halacha will end up being like Rava. But let's take a look. So again, now we're on the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 line, immediately following the parenthetical, and we say Meisvei. I'm going to ask you a question. I'm going to give you show you how come we think that Abaye is correct here, because that in fact Hazama milsi. Kippah, when you have a kippah, now this is not the kippah that we are referring to, although maybe the root of the word may be the same. It's Rashi explains saif, it's a scarf. So shehu tamei midras. Now the tuma of midras refers to the fact that that certain items, if you sit on them or you walk on them, sit on them, then or lay on them, excuse me, then they will receive the same level of tuma of the person themselves. Ordinarily, if I touch something and I'm a rishon l'tuma, so then the thing I touch becomes a sheni. In this situation, with this kind, with these kinds of things that you can sit on, the tuma stays at the same level. So a rishon touches a rishon, or more importantly, an av touches an av hatuma. So the person himself or herself, who is a zav or a zava, he or she sits on this kerchief, and the result is that the kerchief becomes an av hatuma itself. Unisanato Sefer. But then we're going to give that, dedicate that kerchief to a Sefer. And Rashi tells us Sefer Torah, that we're talking about a Torah scroll. Tahor min midrash. All of a sudden, it is no longer subject to the midrash tuma, meaning, as Rashi says, below, if we take a look at Rashi, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 lines down in the narrow lines of Rashi on Mem Cherem and Aleph. Tar min midrash, below shum tvila, without even any going to the mikvah, without any immersion. Debatil le shem midrash, because the name of midrash has left it, because when it was a just plain kerchief, it was something that you would sit on. De omrim lo, amud v'naaseh melachtenu, because we say, get up and we'll do our work with it. Ve'eno mitame od adam v'kelim, and it can no longer make other people or vessels tamei. Aval shem kli alav, but it does still have the name of being a vessel, meaning although it is not going to be an av hatuma any longer for tumas midrash, she'av matpachat hasvarim mitmeyot tuma b'maga. But the truth is that an object like a kerchief, if you were to touch it, even if it were, or a Torah covering, you were to touch a Torah covering, if you're an Av Hatuma, so then it would become a Rishon Latuma. V'zehari naga ba'atzma, and of course it touches itself, ba'odo midras, when it was still a midras. Ukisha avad shem midras, and so when the mimenu, and when the name of midras leaves it, so mikom makom adayin klihu, it remains a vessel, v'nishar alav tumas maga, and so as a result, it retains the tuma of having been touched. Sharehu ro'ila, which is what it's a fit for. Midikatani tohar min midrash, and when we say that it is purified from tumas midrash, bahazmana ba'alma, it seems like as soon as you prepare it, as soon as you say you're going to use it for the Torah. So alma hazmana milsahi. So doesn't this show that hazmana does count as something that's important and does make a difference to the item? So about Tamei Maga Midrash. But again, back into the Gemara, but it remains back into the language in the parentheses of Maga Midrash, the little bet puts it back in, or maybe it says Tamei Mace, but in any event, the point is that we put it is back to, it does retain its Tuma status. So no, Ema Nasanto, Nasanato Ucharachto. Say that the situation is not just the dedication, but rather she gave it to the Torah and it got wrapped around the Torah. So she gave it to the person who was holding the Torah, or a person who was going to put it on the Torah, and it got wrapped around the Torah. So Lamali Nasanato Ucharachto. Why mention both? Why not just mention one of them? Why say the giving over and the wrapping? Because Rav Chisda, it's highlighting a point that Rav Chisda made. Rav Chisda hai sudara de azmane lemeitzar based tefillin, that if you have here you have an example of a tefillin bag, right? So the point is that this bag that's holding the tefillin, when you dedicate it to holding the tefillin, it is only supposed to hold the tefillin. Nothing else should go in the inner bag, because that bag is dedicated for the tefillin. So the Tsar Bay tefillin, and you've wrapped it. So once I had the bag, so I purchased the bag, and then I put my tefillin in it. And so now I've both designated it and used it. So then Asur Lameitzar Bei Pshite, you can't put just stomp coins in it. In fact, if you currently put your siddur in the tefillin bag, you should take it out and leave it outside the tefillin bag, as you can see here. You should have nothing in the tefillin bag other than your tefillin, not even money that you're going to give to tzedakah. Again, that's why it's often you'll see that they double bag them in order to enable you to have an outer bag that is not dedicated for the tefillin. It's dedicated for the tefillin bag. And then now it becomes okay for you to put other things into it. So now that is not true, by the way, for a talus bag. A talus bag does not have this level of kedusha that a tefillin bag has. And so you are able to leave things in with your talus, such as talus clips and the like. Okay. All right. But the point is that if you've designated it and you've used it, so now you can't use it. Asmane velo sarbe, but if you prepared it and you designated it, but you didn't use it, sarbe velo asmane, or you used it, but you did not designate it, meaning that you used it just like a one-time thing. You, for example, you go get a shopping bag from your home and you put your tefillin in that for just one time, but you don't plan to use it over and over again in connection with it. Shari lemaitzer beipshita. Well, then in that case, you're allowed to use use it for other things. Ula abaye de amar hasmana milsahi. So now we understand. So that's why what it means when she says she gave it over and she wrapped it, it's she both gave it over and had the intention that it be used for the Torah, and it was actually used for the Torah. And so what about Abaye?
So then it wouldn't have, then it would lose its
Tummy
midrash?
Midrash. Exactly. It loses the shame Midrash, and now it just becomes regular Tuma, that as if it had touched the Zav. So it's a Rishon Latuma rather than an Av Latuma.
And what's the suggestion that Rashi mentions that it did below Tevila? When would we tovel a scarf or something similar, a piece of clothing?
No. Oh, absolutely. It's actually so. Thank you for raising that question. In fact, when we were observing the laws of Tuma, which we don't really effectively observe today, you absolutely would dip your garments into a mikvah if they became an avlatuma. So, for example, a woman becomes a nidah. She would need to put the sheets that she sleeps on into the mikvah in order to reduce the level of tuma that's associated with it, and to cause them not to become tamei any longer. We are not worried about that today, but yes, in fact, that's absolutely correct. We would put things like that in the mikvah if they became certainly if they became an avlatuma. If they became a regional latuma, I'm not sure that it would be necessary. It depends on maybe if we're worried about, because I don't think a regional latuma kli can just make something else tame. Again, we haven't gone through the laws of tuma in a while, and so I don't have them at my fingertips. But the bottom line is that absolutely we would put things in the mikvah, and that's exactly Rashi's point, is that we don't need to have done that to go down the one level. Now, if you want to eliminate the tuma, then you would need to put it in the mikvah. Okay, Ula Abaye de Amar Hasmana Milsahi. So, according to Abaye, who says that all you need is the designation Asmane. As long the brisa that we're reading is really just talking about having set it aside. Afal gav delot sarbe, even though you didn't wrap the tefillin in it. And that when we say that, and we'll see this brisa that Rav Chisda was talking about inside shortly, but the bottom line is that that even if you don't wrap the tefillin, it's dedicated, and sarbe. But if you do wrap it, like if you get a bag out of your bag of bags that we have, and you say, okay, I'm going to use this one time for my tefillin, if you designate it for the constant use of the tefillin, well, now all of a sudden that bag is going to be changed and become kodesh, and it'll be real. And so as a result, you won't be able to use it for any other purpose. Elo asbene lo. But if you use the bag for just one time and you don't set it aside for that purpose, well, then the status doesn't change. Tashma. Nefesh. Okay, so that was effort number one, and we were unsuccessful to support either direction, and that was from the case of the kerchief being used for the Torah. So Tashma, nefesh shebena'o l'shem chai. If one builds if you take a look at the Rashi nefesh, it's about 15 lines up, maybe 20 lines up in the narrow lines, just under 20 lines up in the narrow lines of Rashi. Nevesh binyan shal hakever. We're talking about a building that is on a grave. Shabana'o l'shem chai, but it was built for somebody who's alive. L'kashiyamos yikaverbo, so that when that person dies, they would be buried in this above ground structure. So mutter bahana. If that back into the Gemara, if in fact you build the structure and the person is still alive, then it is you're allowed to use it for other purposes. Hosif bo dimos echad l'shem mace. If you add a single row for a particular deceased person, Asar bahana. Now the entire structure is dedicated for burial, and it's going to be prohibited to use. So doesn't this show that designating a row of stones for the person who's deceased is going to be sufficiently significant to support Abaye's position? No, not necessarily. Hakabamayas derama base mace. We're talking about where you actually put the deceased inside. So it's not just that you prepared it, but you actually used it. Well, ihachi my irya hosif. Well, then why did you need to talk about adding to the structure? Kilo hosif nami. Even if you didn't add to the structure, the same law would apply. After all, once you put the deceased in the building, so now and dedicate it as their burial location, you're not allowed to benefit from it. So lo tzricha afal gav de. No, the point is that the question is in this situation, you emptied it. So if you emptied it, then the structure remains forbidden, even though you move the body. But if, in fact, you made no change and you originally had this structure for a person who was alive, you put somebody deceased in it, and then you remove them from it, then because it wasn't prepared for this for this deceased, so then as a result, it would no longer retain its prohibition on usage. Amar Rafram bar Papa, Amar Rav Chisda, im haya makiro. If you know which row you created that it was specifically for the deceased, and so now you put the person in, and then you took the person out, called so umutar. You can remove that one row of stones, and again, the structure will be again permitted for usage. So the point is that the only time that we see that something is going to be problematic, according to the way Rava is interpreting this brisa, is if you actually put the deceased in and you have the right intention. Tashma, okay, effort number 3. Again, we're going to try and support Abaye. Tashma,
you want to say it's this specific deceased individual? If it was another deceased individual, it would not be permitted to use it according to this.
No. I think that if it's the point is that if in fact if the person whoever gets put in there, the point is that if it was made when the person was alive, then it is only going to be prohibited when the person is there. If the person gets removed, well, then it would, because it was prepared when the person was alive, there wasn't the same kind of dedication, and so as a result, therefore, it's going to become permitted again if he gets removed. Whereas if if they add a row of stones, so then after the person dies, so it's for the deceased, well, then now the entire structure becomes prohibited unless you remove that row of stones, even if you take the person out.
Referring to the deceased person, if they're removing.
Yes.
So the question is, I'm asking, if it's designated for a deceased person, is it designated only for that specific deceased person?
I understand your question now. if one were to dedicate something for somebody who is already deceased, I believe that you would not be allowed to use it for any other deceased person.
Mhm.
Because well, it depends on whether we say Hazmana Lav Milsa. According to Abaye, you would not be able to use it for any other deceased person. According to Rava, once you use it for that deceased person, then you can't use it for anybody else.
I mean, is that really true? Sometimes, aren't there cases where if an individual is buried in this particular place and then that person is removed, let's say reinterned in Israel, for example, removed from it, is that site from which he's been from which he was removed,
Excellent question.
buried, is that now forbidden to be used by any other deceased person in the future?
So we're going to see that actually there is a special law with respect to ground. That when it comes to ground, maybe we saw it over the weekend. I can't remember now, but either we're about to see it or we saw it over the weekend. That ground is different. Actually, no. Here we go. That's the next case. That the ground is different. So when it's an actual burial location, so then we are going to allow the person to be somebody else to be buried there because ground can't. It's not so simple. But when it comes to something that would be above ground, if we had an above ground tomb, then what you're saying is absolutely what the law would be. You would not be able to inter someone else there. Unless, of course, it was meant for multiple interments, then you would be allowed to. So Tashma, Hachotziv Kever Laviv, if somebody carves out a grave for his father. And then he buries the father in a different grave. The person himself may never be buried there. So so isn't that show that he never used it for his father, and yet he's not allowed to bury himself there? And so doesn't that show that Hazmana Milsahi, that actually it is considered a real thing, that in fact he is now going to be that he can't bury anybody else there, or he can't bury himself there? No, Hasam Mishum Kvod Aviv. That's a special situation because it was the honor of the father. As Rashi says, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 12 lines up. Mishum Kvod Aviv. Yesh Lachush. We have to worry about it. About Mishum Isurei Hana. It's only because of the honor of the father that we're worried about, that we're going to say that he can't bury there. But when it comes to the prohibition against Hana, Leika, that doesn't exist. Kagom im chatzvu l'shem meis acher mitchila lo. And if he in fact had he had done the carving out for some other person and never buried them there, so then there would not have been an issue in the first place. So hachinami mistabra, and it actually seems like this is a real the correct understanding back into the Gemara. The Katani Seifa, because we learned at the end of that brisa, which says, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, that if you hew stones from a quarry to build the grave, and then you don't use those stones and instead bury your father somewhere else, so then the son is never allowed to bury himself with these stones. And now, if you say that this is all based on the prohibition or the requirement to honor our parents, so then it all makes sense. But amrat mishum hazmana. But if you say that this is really about preparation, does anybody say that the spinning of the thread in order to weave the shrouds should be forbidden? No, of course not. The point is that there is a point at which it is too early to be worried about Hazmana, meaning that if you're just if you're just spinning the thread, even though you say to yourself, according to Abaye, that I want this to be used in a shroud for this particular person, we're not going to say that all results in any kind of prohibition, because you're not talking about the object itself. It's too early in the production of the object status for it to actually be said that this is the item that's going to be used for the mace. So that
Not
would
sure that
never.
Rashi answered the question that I asked. I mean, when you said, when we read that Rashi above, where it said if it was Kavoda Aviv, okay, but if it was for someone else and he didn't actually bury someone there, we can still use it. But my
Correct.
question was, but suppose someone was buried there
Yes,
and we
yes,
moved that
I
place.
understand. We haven't gotten there. Let's go to the
Okay.
next case. Tashma, kever chadash mutar bahana. A new grave you're allowed to benefit from. And so let's take a look. And kever chadash, hashta kazalka dait, Rashi says, 3 lines up. Hasha hashta, at this point, kasalka dait afilu zimno lames, that even if we prepared it for a particular deceased, so then you would be allowed to use it. Hitil bo nefesh asur bahana. But if in fact you put a stillborn baby, so that's a baby that died younger than 30 days old, hitil then it would be prohibited to derive benefit. What's the implication? Hitil in only if the stillborn was placed there. Lo hitil, if it was not placed there, lo, then it would not be. So the point is doesn't this show that hazama is hazmana is not significant, because after all, you're allowed to derive benefit until something happens. No, huadin. Abaye would tell you no, that the same law applies even if you don't actually put the stillborn in. To afal gaf the lo hitel, even if you didn't put it in. The apuke midrabban Shimon ben Gamliel. And the point of referencing the stillborn is to highlight a distinction from Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, because Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says that Amar ein lenefilim tfisas a kever, that a stillborn does not take possession effectively of the grave where they were buried. So Kamash Malan, so the Tanakh Kama tells us, in fact, that is the case. So let's hold on to that question. I'm pretty sure we're going to get there. And if we don't, then God willing, I'll answer the question tomorrow. But Tashma, Moser Hame, so again, so that question number 4 was trying to support Rava, and we gave an interpretation that Abaye can respond, that Abaye can understand the same brisa in a different way. Tashma, Moser Hamesim Lamesim, that when you have money left over that has been raised for the dead, Moser, it can go to other dead people. Meaning that if we collect money for this particular deceased, or for the dead in general, so then we're allowed to use it for anyone that we want. But Moser Hames, but if you raise for a particular deceased person, then lior shav, then it has to go to their particular heirs. So doesn't this show again that I might have thought that you wouldn't be able to benefit from those funds at all because they were raised to bury somebody, and so as a result, once they became associated with the plan to use them to bury somebody, they would all become prohibited for any other purpose. So, and doesn't that show? And since they're not prohibited, doesn't that show that Rava is correct and that Hazmana lav milsa? So no, Hakabamayaskinan. Shagavu mechayim. No, maybe they collected the money when the person was still alive. Whoa, no, that can't be. Hello, Taniyaki. But 1 second. Listen to the following case. Titnan, we got a Mishnah that says Moser Amesim Lemesim, Moser Ames Yorshav. So again, same original lines. Vitani Allah. And we learned a brisa that explains this Mishnah. Ketzad, what is this talking about? Gavu lemesim stam, if you collect for unspecified dead people, zeo moser hamesim lemesim. That's where we say that you can use it for anybody. Gavu lemezeh, but if you collect for this particular dead person, implying what? That the dead person is already dead. Zeo moser hames liyarshav. That's the situation where it's going to go to the heirs. So it can't be that we're talking about a situation where you collected when the person was alive. Well, 1 second. Maybe according to you, it also doesn't work so well. According to the read that's for Abaye, it also doesn't work so well because Ema Seifa. What does the end of that brisa say? Rabbi Meir Omer lo yiga behen ad sheyavu Eliyahu. Rabbi Meir says that when you collect for a specific dead person, you cannot use the money until Eliyahu comes. And Rabbi Nosson Omer Yasenu dimos al kivro. No, you should use it to build a monument over the grave. Oziluf lifnei mitaso, or you should use it to sprinkle wine in front. Rashi explains, you sprinkle wine in front of the beer, in front of the casket, so that it helps address the smell, etc., and the like. But the point is that these latter two opinions show that Hasmana Milsahi, that in fact, having set it aside for the deceased, you're either not allowed to use it at all, or you need to use it, or you need to use it specifically for this deceased by expanding his monument, or by doing some other thing that will make the deceased experience a better experience. So we end up having a brisa that has the first part seems to show that Hasmana lav milsa, just like Rava. And the last part, according to Rabbi Natan and Rabbi Meir, it seems like Abaye is correct, where we say Hasmana milsahi. So Ella Abaye mitaris l'taimei, v'Rava mitaris l'taimei. Rather, both Rava and Abaye can explain this brisa in their own approaches, so that according to Rava, Hasmana Milsa, Lav Milsa, and according to Abaye, Hasmana Milsahi. So we can have them each explain how would they do it. So let's take a look. Abaye mitaris l'taimei. Abaye answers the way he thinks. Dekuli alma hasmana milsahi. Everybody agrees that actually, if you do an act of dedication and designation, well, then it will cause something to be prohibited. And Tanakama savar dechazi le tafis. No, because when you set aside money, the Tanakama understands that it's always understood that when money is set aside, only the amount that actually ends up being needed is dedicated to burial. And what isn't actually ends up being necessary, the deceased doesn't actually grab onto it, and the prohibition doesn't grab onto it. Rabbi Meir misapgale itafis ilo tafis. Now, Rabbi Meir is uncertain about whether or not the extra money is grabbed onto the court by the corpse, and therefore hilkach lo yiga bahen ad sheyavu Eliyahu, and therefore it can't be used until Eliyahu comes. And Rabbi Nosson pshitile devade tafis. Rabbi Nosson takes the other extreme. So again, the Tanakama said, of course, the deceased doesn't grab onto any of the extra money. Rabbi Nosson says, no, the deceased grabs onto all of the money. And Hilkoch Yased Dimos al Kivro, and therefore you have to build a monument. You have to use it for some purpose for the deceased. The Rava Mataritz l'taimei. And again, Rava explains his reasoning. And again, he says that Hasmana lav milsa, and so as a result, the dedication can't actually be, the designation can't be the thing that's being significant, but rather, and lukuli alma hasmana lav milzahi Tanakama savar ki bazu lay, that when they cause the indignity for burying for collecting money to bury this person, achuli machil ziluse gabi yorshin. He's like, okay, listen, yes, I don't like the fact that money had to be collected for my burial, but I don't mind it going to my heirs. And therefore, when it gets raised for me, I'm going to be fine that it goes to my heirs instead of to me. The Rebbe Meir misapkale imachil o ilomachil. And Rebbe Meir is uncertain whether or not the deceased forgoes the honor for his heirs. And therefore, it has to wait until Eliyahu comes. Hilkach lo yiga behen. And therefore, you can't use them. Rabbi Nosson, pshita le de lo mochil. And Rabbi Nosson says, no, of course the deceased is not going to allow it for any other use. And Hilkach yaseh dimos al kivro. So it isn't about whether or not there's some kind of Isser Hana that comes in. The point is when you raise money for somebody, do they make effectively some sort of kinyan associated with that money? And so therefore, Ozilov live name so, or therefore you have to either make a monument, or you have to sprinkle wine in front of the deceased as they are going towards the burial.
But
Okay.
why is there money? I don't understand why there would be money left over. If the people collect money for this person,
Mhm.
why can't they use all the money? Who's deciding how much money to use for a given funeral or procession?
Well, I mean, first of all, it's a very easy to understand. I mean, the funeral has a fixed cost, and you raise money, and people donated more than that fixed cost. I mean, I'm kind of confused by your question. It seems pretty simple to understand how it could happen. Now, obviously, there are so many in our funerals. There are so many different levels of casket, although one should get the simplest casket. But in any event, there's so many levels of different kinds of things that you could do. And of course, there are so many places that and especially if you go to Israel, where you can bury somebody. And so therefore you can imagine lots of different costs. But in an old setting, if you think about old time Europe, there was a one cemetery. You knew how much it cost to bury the person. You knew how much all the things, the casket and the shroud all cost in order to bury the person. It was a straightforward question as to how much money needed to be raised. And the point is that if we have multiple people raising funds and there's no means of communication, it's of course very likely that there's going to be extra funds that are raised and left over.
I've noticed that the Hebrew Free Burial Association does not raise money for particular burials.
I'm sure that's correct. I'm sure that's in part because of these halachot. Yes.
And as far as I've been able to find out, the very first communal organization of Jews in what became the United States, was a burial society in the 17th century in New York.
Wow. Interesting. Okay. Well, I can understand why, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's exactly, you're absolutely right, especially if they weren't being allowed to be buried anywhere else. All right.
Well,
So,
we're not supposed to bury in
well, I
Christian
understand,
cemeteries.
right? But I guess the question is sort of like, how observant were they? Meaning, what were they doing during the rest of their life that the burial society was before the synagogue? That's really where I was going.
Yeah, it was decades before the synagogue.
Exactly my point.
Yeah.
So all right. So Tashma again. Now effort number 6. Now we go back again to try and support support Abaye. So again, the last two, we had first 3 were supporting Abaye. The next 2 were trying to support Rava. Now we go back to Abaye. Tashma hayu aviv ve'imo mizarkin bo kalim. If in a very unfortunate situation, parents lose a child and they are so distraught that they begin to throw vessels towards the beer that holds their son. Mitzvah al ha'acherim lahatzilan. It is a good deed for other people to save these vessels, because if in fact they end up being buried with the deceased, there's nothing that can be done. Then they're definitely for the deceased. But the implication is that in fact the parents' quote unquote designation of saying, we want to throw everything with our deceased child onto the deceased, into the burial plot, is not actually considered significant, because it's not because we're allowed to rescue these items. As Rashi says, mitzvah al acherim haroin otam lahatzilam. The people who see this, they have to rescue these items. V'litlan me'alav, and they take them from upon the deceased. De'ein hashavas aveda godol mizeh. There's no greater return of something lost than this. Alma Hazmana Lav Milsahi. So we see that the dedication of something, the designation of something, is not in fact relevant to Milsahi, because if it was significant, Leikatso, there shouldn't be any way to save it now that the parents have sort of thought about throwing it towards the child. So as we turn to Memchet Amabet, we say Hasa Mishum Muraraihu. No, that kind of designation is not a designation. That is what Abaye would say. And so that is why it is not considered significant. That really, if it was a true designation, it would be prohibited. But because they are only doing so because they are so upset about the loss of their child, so that doesn't count. And if that's true, that that it was only because of the 1 second, if that's true, what about the following that they learn on this brisa? Amar Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel b'med devar mamurim shelo nagu b'mita aval nagu b'mita asurin. That when we say that the parents threw it, it was key that the items never actually touched the beer on which the deceased was lying. But if in fact they got to the beer and they rested on the child, so then it would become prohibited and you wouldn't be able to rescue them. So doesn't that show that if in fact their mindset was not sufficient to create a designation, why do the items become prohibited? We see that in fact you need to have, everybody agrees that if you have designation and if you have designation, so then the garments should be forbidden if they touch. If you don't have designation, why should they be forbidden if they touch the bed? So Targuma Ula B'mita Hanikberet Imo. We're talking about the beer that is going to be buried with the corpse. And we're worried that if in fact we allow something to be removed from the deceased, then people will say, oh, well, if they could remove this piece of clothing, maybe they should be able to remove the shrouds as well. And so as a result, we end up saying that in fact, again, this is as Abaye would understand this brisa, that in fact hasmana milsahi, that if you have if you make a designation, it makes a difference, and it's only because of their anguish, and it's not a true designation. And yet, if it touches the deceased's bed, the corpse, the casket, it will be the corpse or the casket. It will be required to be buried with the deceased. The reason for that is because we're worried it's only a gzeira. It's not actually, it isn't automatically prohibited on its own. It's a gzeira that we don't want to cause any problems with respect to this situation. Okay.
Does this support Abaye then?
So, well, again, we try to support Abaye. No. We tried to support Rava, and then we ended up supporting Abaye. We ended up saying that Abaye had an explanation. 1 second. So it's actually, I miscounted. It seems like there are actually 8 efforts. It seems like there are 8 efforts, and 4 are for each of them. 4 are for Rava and 4 are for Abaye. So back
So
to
what happened? So this happened when Abaye was supported here, or he had an explanation?
He had an explanation, right? Again, Rava would say that, just understand it very simply, that why is the father able and the mother able to get back their garments? It's because their intention doesn't mean anything, because intention is not relevant. And so that's why they can get their garments back. And Abaye says, no, we don't consider this intention. That's how they understand that's how both Rava and Abaye can make their opinions consistent with this brisa.
So, but according to Abaye, they wouldn't get it back, though, right?
No. Everybody says you get it back.
Abaye says if they did not touch the
correct.
arrow.
Everybody says you get it back if it does not touch the deceased. Okay. Rava says you get it back because hasmana lav milsa, and Abaye says you get it back because this is not hasmana, because they're so upset. So Tashma, next attempt number 7. Kisha asolanicho bo tefillin. So now we actually cite the brisa that we referred to earlier when we cited Rav Chisda, that if you have a pouch that's made for tefillin, asor laniach bo mos, you can't put it inside, money inside. Hiniach bo tefillin. So that, but yaniach bo mos. But if you only use it once and you put your tefillin in it, well, then you can put money in it. So again, the point is that you need to, again, as ema aso v'hiniach bo tefillin. So doesn't this show that if you made a pouch and you actually place your tefillin, asar lahaniach bo bomos to the Rav Chisda? No, so we can say that again, it's like Rav Chisda. You need to do both in order for it to be prohibited. So the simple read would say that just the dedication is sufficient, because it says if you made it for the purpose of putting tefillin in it, then we say asur laniach bo mos, you can't put money in it. But Rav Chisda says no, in that situation we're dealing where you also had put your tefillin in it, and so that's why it's not a case of Hazmana Milsahi. And so as a result, we can still have it be consistent with Rava. Tashma, final proof. And again, this time we're going to be successful. Amar la'uman, if you say to a craftsman, Asa li tik shel sefer, make a chest for a scroll. O nartik shel tefillin, or a case for tefillin. Ad shelo nishtamish behen kodesh, as long as they haven't been used for the purpose of being something holy, mutar lehishtamish behen chol, you can use it for some other purpose. Nishtamish behen kodesh, but once you use it, asur lehishtamish behen chol, then you cannot. So it's very clear here. You had the intention and you did not use it, and it's not prohibited. You're absolutely right. This is a proof for Rava, Tanaihi. And so our answer is, it's a machlokas Tanaim, Titania. Tzipan zahav, if you coated tefillin with gold, which you're not allowed to do, Oshatala aleihen, or shel behema tmeya, or you used the hide of a non-kosher animal, psulot, so then the tefillin are not kosher. Or behema tahora, if you use the skin of a kosher animal, ksherot, then it is kosher. Afalpi shalot ibdan lishman. Even if the hide from which the casings are made was not specifically prepared for tefillin. So Rashi explains, afal gaf shalo avdu, it's 5, 10, 50, about 18, 19 lines down in Rashi. Afal gaf shalo avdu, la'or zeh lishmo. Even though this skin was not made specifically for tefillin, why? Dahazmana lav milsahi, because according to the Tanakama, there is no need for any kind of preparation. Preparation doesn't actually do anything. V'lo ichpat lanba, and we don't really care about it. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, af or behema tahora psulos, ad sheyabdu lishman, until you actually make the skin of the tefillin, the hide that's going to be used for the tefillin, specifically for the purpose of the tefillin, it's going to be prohibited. And that shows that Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel clearly says that hazmana milsa, just like Abaye. And so this brisa shows a specific debate that works out just like Abaye and Rava. And so the question of Hazmana Milsahi is one of a machlokas Tanai. Amar le Ravina le Rava, mi'ika duchta deramu bemes, va'arge beged lames. Well, one second. Where did we begin? How did we end yesterday? We ended yesterday by saying that Abaye was talking about somebody who created the shrouds, and now those shrouds are going to be prohibited because the shrouds were created for this particular deceased person. But how could that happen? Because if you actually have to make the shrouds for a particular deceased person, then the implication is that the deceased person is waiting for the shrouds. That shouldn't be. We don't want to ever delay burial. So is there really a place where we're going to cause people to wait for a shroud? Amrle, Rav explains in, yes, Kigon Shachve de Harpanya, like the people, like the deceased in Harpanya. And Rashi tells us, Aniyim hayu, that they were very poor. V'la'achar misa govin lahen. And after they died, you had to collect for them. V'organ lahen begadim. And only then were you able to weave the clothing for them. Kalushim la'achar misa, only then after they had died. So that is the story of the poor people of Harpanya. All right. So Darish Maremer Hilchasa Kavasi de Abaye. Maremer says that the halacha is like Abaye, v'Rabbanan Amri Hilchasa Kavasi de Rava, and the rabbis say that the halacha is like Rava, v'Hilchasa Kavasi de Rava, and again the halacha is like Rava. All right, we'll try and get a little bit further.
It's pretty amazing that it took toward the end of the Amoraic period or even the generation after them to actually resolve this.
Yes, correct. It is interesting. Yeah, because the question is to what extent do our intentions matter? Now, most commentaries say that this is talking about where you actually when we say intention, does it mean that you just use your words, or do you actually have to do an action? That's actually part of a debate among the Rishonim.
So practically, what does this mean? That halacha kivate the Rava, that they would have to designate it and make it
and use it until it's actually used. It does not actually become prohibited. So Tana Rabbanan. So now we're going to have a discussion about somebody who's executed by the king for having rebelled against the crown, and who inherits the executed person's property. So Tana Rabbanan, Haruge Malchus Nichseyan Lamelech. So I think it must be that the answer to your question, Ken, was in yesterday's daf. God willing, I'll try and begin tomorrow with the answer to your question. So Tana Rabbanan, Haruge Malchus Nichseyan Lamelech. Those who are executed by the king, their property goes to the king. Haruge Beis Din Nichseyan Liyorshin. But when the court kills them, then their property goes to the heirs. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Av Haruge Malchus Nichseyan Liyorshin. No, even the people who are killed by the king, their property goes to their heirs. So Amrulei the Rabbi Yehuda V'Halo Kvar Nemar Hine Becherem Nachvot Sher Yarad Shem L'Rishto. 1 second. But what about the fact that King Achav took the vineyards of Navos after having him killed? So Amar Lahen ben Achi Aviv Haya. No, they were relative. V'Roy Liyorsho Haya, and he was able to inherit him. V'Halo Harbe Banim Hayula. But 1 second, Navos had many sons. Amar Lahen. So Rabbi Yehuda said back. Also, the Esbanav Harag. He didn't just kill Ahav didn't just kill Navos, but he killed also his sons. Shene'amar imlo es demei Navos ve'es demei vanav re'isi. For I have surely seen the blood of Navos and the blood of his sons. So therefore, it shows that he killed them. For Rabbanan, no, and Rabbanan say no. In fact, he did not kill them. Hahu banim haru'uyan latzeis mimenu. The point was that he was saying that through killing Navos, there were not going to be any more children for them. Okay, so Bishlam Lamanda Amr Nechsayim Lamelech. Now, according to the one who says that namely the Tanakama, who says that when the king kills somebody, the property goes to the king. Hainu Duksiv Beirach Navos Elokim V'Melech. When Achav set Navos up based on the advice of his wife, with false testimony, they testified about him cursing not only God, but the king, so that it would be a rebellion against the king, so the king would be entitled to kill him. Elamanda Amar Nichseim Liyorshin, but according to those who say that it goes to the heirs, so Lama Lila Melech. Why did, according to Rabbi Yehuda, he bother by also saying that he cursed the king? Why bother with the king? All that he matters is that he cursed God. 1 second, L'tamech Elokim Lamali. But according to you, who say that he needed to rebel against the king in order for the king to be able to kill him, why did they also say that he cursed God? All this, of course, is not true. Ela Pushe Rizcha, but in order to cause people to get angry. Hachinami La Pushe Rizcha. So the point is that it's all about increasing the amount of anger, and as a result, you can't necessarily learn anything from that verse? Well, Bishlem Lamanda Amar Nichsein Lamelech. Again, according to the rabbis who say that it all goes to the king when you do a rebellious act against the king and the king kills you. Hainu Dichsiv Vayanas Yoav El Ohel Hashem Vayachazeh B'Karnos Lemizbeach. When Yoav ran away from Shlomo in order to save himself because Shlomo was going to kill him. Uchsiv Vayomer Lo Kipo Amus. And Yoav says, I'm going to die here. Doesn't that indicate, because he's at the Beis Hamikdash, that he wants to die through the Sanhedrin rather than through Hashem, through King Shlomo killing him? Because King Shlomo killing him would cause his property to go to King Shlomo, whereas if the Sanhedrin kills him, it would go to his heirs. And so isn't that the reason why he wanted to stay at the Beis HaMikdash? And so doesn't that show that the rabbis are right and Rabbi Yehuda is incorrect? Ellen Lamanda Amar Nichsayim Leyorshim. But if you say that even if one is executed by the king, the property goes to the heirs, my nafkalamine, what does Yoav care whether the Sanhedrin kills him or the king kills him? Well, Rabbi Yehuda would answer, L'chayesha. No, the point is he gets to live a longer life. But Yasha Banayu as Hamelach Davar Lemor. So in that discussion where Yoav is at the Beis Hamikdash and sticking to the altar, and Banayu returns to the king, and he brings back Yoav's message. Ko diber Yoav v'cho anani. This is what Yoav said, and this is what I answered. Amar le. Here is what the exchange was. Zil emale tarte lo ta'aved bahai gavra. Look, you can't do both to me. I katlesle, if you want to kill me, fine. Kabul latuse de lataye avuch. But then you need to accept the curse that your father cursed me with. Ve'ilo, but if in fact you don't want to get that curse, Shavke deleku bilatuse dilatayavucha. Well, then leave that curse on me and don't kill me. And what did he say back? Vayomer lo hamelech. The king Shlomo said back, Aseh kasher diber. Do what you were supposed to do. Ufaga bo ukvarato. Go kill him and bury him. So Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav. Kol kalalos shekil David as Yoav niskaimu bizarro shel David. And so as a result, because in fact David had cursed Yoav and then had Shlomo killed Yoav, you can't do both. And so as a result, all those curses that David put on Yoav bounced back and went on David's own descendants. Because what did he say about Yoav? Al yikares mi beis Yoav zab umitzora umachazik v'pelech v'nofel v'cherev v'chaser lechem. So there are 5 different things that happened here. One, that there should always be a zav. There should always be a mitzorah in Yoav's house. There should always be somebody who needs a cane. There should always be somebody who falls by the sword, and there should always be somebody who lacks bread. So we're going to do 5 examples, and with that we will conclude. So Zav Merachavam Tiksiv the Hamelech Rechavam his ametz la'alos b'merkava lanus Yerushalayim. And so the fact that there was a zav is in connection with Rechavam, because what did Rechavam do? He went up onto a chariot, and we have the word merkava is also in, or a word very similar to it, is also referenced in connection with the psukim talking about a mitzorah, because Uksiv v'chol hamerkav asher yukav alav hazav yitam. I'm sorry, with respect to a zav, that anybody who rides anything that a zav rides on shall become contaminated. Now, of course, this is the precise form of tuma that we began with today. But in any event, so that's the bottom line, is that that shows that Rechavam was a zav. Mitzorah, Uziyahu became a Mitzorah. Tiksiv, Uvechezkaso gava libo al ad lahashchis. He was so powerful that Uziyahu wanted to act, that he began to act inappropriately. V'yimal b'Hashem elokav, and he acted in an inappropriate way with Hashem. V'yavo el hekal Hashem, because he came into the sanctuary. La'aktir al mizbeach ketoras, he brought his own incense. Uksiv v'hatzaras zarcha b'mitzcho, and so as a result there was saras on his forehead. 3, machazik b'pelech ma'asa. Asa was the one who needed a cane. Diksiv rak le'ezik naso chala es raglo. But when he got old, he had a disease in his feet. V'amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav sha'achazo podagra. He got this disease called podagra. Amar le'mar zutra berei to Rav Nachman.
It's gout.
Hekidami. Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, podagra mimetically is gout.
All right, wow. Because so Amar Lay, Kamaka b'v'sar hachai. That what does it feel like? It feels like needle into the raw flesh. So if that's gout, that I think that the from people that have I know have had it, yes, that's basically a description. Mina yada. How did he know this? So three possibilities. Because he himself had it. Or he may have learned it from his teacher. Sod Hashem lireyav uvriso lahodiyam. That the secret of Hashem is with those who fear Hashem, and His covenant is made known to them. Meaning that he had it through some sort of divine inspiration. No fel b'cherev. What about the fourth item? Is that there was going to be somebody who falls through the sword? Mi Yoshiyahu. Now we talk about Yoshiyahu on Tisha B'Av. Diksiv vayoru hayorim lamelech Yoshiyahu, that the archers shot Yoshiyahu. Va'amar of Yehuda Amar Rav sha'asu kol gufo kichvara, that his body was made like a sieve. That's how many holes it had in it. V'chasar lachem, and the one who lost, who had no bread, miyachanya. That's Yechanya, because Diksiv va'aruchaso. Aruchas tamid nidnalo, that he was given meals continually. Now, that is the last pasuk in Malachim Bet, and it is a pasuk that refers to Rashi, as corrected by the Masoras Hashas, notes that this is referring to Evil Merodach, who was Nebuchadnezzar's heir and son and successor in the kingship. And the implication is that Yechanya got food from Evil Merodach, but he did not get food from when Nebuchadnezzar was king. And so as a result, he lacked food. So Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, about all of this, Hainu da Amri, this is what people say, Tehei luta velo tehei lata, that you should be the one who is cursed rather than the one who is the curser. Because if in fact the curse is not deserved, then it bounces back to the person who does the cursing. Whereas if you curse them, and so as a result, better to never curse, or to be the one who's cursed, especially if it's a false curse, and then to be the one who does the cursing.
Agreed.
And so as a result, we should remember that and always be careful with our language. Again, another indication that what we say really matters. I'm going to have to go
back to the issue of taking the property of the person whom you've executed. Isn't it true that a Jewish king in a Jewish theocracy can simply take people's property for his use if he deems it?
So I don't think I don't think it is as simple as that. I think that because the Gemara talks about when the king wants a right of way for the way he's going, he can get a right of way wherever he wants. So, I mean, indirectly, the answer may be he can maneuver things so that it's true, but I don't believe that the Gemara says that he could just take whatever he wants, because the whole language of sort of the king's way can be wherever, can be as wide as he wants. It implies that he can't just do whatever he wants.
Well, he can go wherever he wants.
Yes, he can go wherever he wants, and thereby, that's why I said, it may be that the effect is that he could take whatever he wants, but it's not clear to me that he could take whatever he wants, sell it, and put it in his own bank account. He can make a king's way wherever he wants and make a highway / road wherever he wants, but I'm not sure that he has the ability to sort of just take possessions. And of course, that was the mashal that Natan gives to David HaMelech about taking from the poor person. And of course, if in fact the mashal falls because the rich person in the mashal is the king, well, then David could have just said back, well, yes, what I described only applies to rich people, but the king, he could take whatever he wants, even from a poor person. So the fact that David HaMelech doesn't respond that way, again, to me suggests that there are some limits on what a king can do, and can't just confiscate anything that he wants.
But we had a whole Gemara when we was talking about Shmuel in Sanhedrin. I mean, this is Sanhedrin about 2, 3 weeks ago, where there was all the Agadata there, but it said that Shmuel warned the people. There was a question whether he was actually warning them or this was what the king could do. But in that in that chakra in that discussion, it said one of the things you should know if you want a king, the king can take whatever he wants from you.
So I believe that the way I would read that is that he can tax as high as he wants. And that would be the method and not literally take, but I have to go back and take a look at that Gemara to remind myself.
Potentially 100%.
Yeah, I mean that's why I said I think that effectively the king probably does have that ability, but from a practical perspective, I mean from a practical perspective, he may have that ability, but I don't think that that is in fact his intention. Meaning, I don't think that that's what he's supposed to do. I think that it's only, we give him so many different powers that effectively he can take everything, but he has to follow certain procedures in order to do that.
The Beatles song Tax Man was when the top income tax rate in Britain was 95%. And Harold Wilson and Edward Heath are mentioned by name in the song.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
All right.
Tell me, with this last Rashi here, you mentioned, well, you were talking about, we talked about Aruchat Tamid. Now, you mentioned, but Rashi says it's come Me'et Nebuchadnezzar Yitalo. And
Yeah,
you
so you
mentioned
have to take a
something
look at the
else.
little chet. The little chet tells us it's actually Avul Merudach, and if you go take a look in the Navi, you'll see that Nebuchadnezzar has already died. So that's why this correction of Masoras Hashas is there.
Oh, okay.
All right. Yishikach, everybody. Have a great day. And I still owe you the answer to that question, Ken. I'm going to go back and take a look at that. Again, I think that the Earth has special rules that are associated with it. Looking forward to continuing our learning tomorrow.